Do we always choose the right direction when making important decisions? What are the shortcuts in our mind that mislead us? Isn't the path to happiness really as easy as we think? If these questions have puzzled you, then the book by Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, opens the curtains of this complicated process of our mind. Kahneman explains in this book that there are two different ways of thinking in our mind. System 1 is our fast and natural way of thinking. It is based on common knowledge and habits. As soon as we face a situation, this System 1 tries to reach a conclusion as soon as possible. For example, in the evening when it suddenly rains, you decide to take an umbrella without thinking. System 2 is our slow and rational way of thinking. It is based on logic and analysis. In complex situations or important decisions, System 2 works. For example, if you decide to buy a new house, you will look at various options, compare their advantages and disadvantages, and analyze them. All this is the work of System 2. Kahneman tells that the interesting thing is that most of the time our system is doing the same thing. This is the fast and slow way. But this is the reason why we make mistakes many times. Kahneman tells in this book in detail about these two ways of thinking, as well as how misunderstandings and prejudices enter our thinking and how they affect our decisions. If you want to get a better understanding of how you think and how you can be more aware and make better decisions, then the book, Thinking Fast and Slow, is necessary for you. There's an interesting game going on in our mind. There is a story like a film between two characters, which has a lot of contradictions, drama and contradictions. In two characters, System 1 is included. Hence how game theory or the traditional ideas about players come to life. It's as though someone without the contradictory emotions relating to pleasure and pain. When they meet, their conversation determines how we think, decide, and work. System 1 is a part of the brain that works more suddenly, often without any conscious control. When you hear a loud and sudden voice, you can experience this system in an active form. What will you do? You can immediately and naturally focus your attention on it. This is System 1. This process is a legacy of millions of years of development. It is based on the ability to make important, beneficial decisions and to make judgments. System 2 is what we understand when we imagine a part of the responsible brain for a person's decisions, reasoning, and beliefs. It controls the mind's conscious activities such as self-great truth, choice, and intentional concentration. For example, imagine that you are looking for a girl in the crowd. Your mind will intentionally focus on the work. It remembers anything that helps to determine a person's characteristics or his guidelines. This ability eliminates distortions, which helps you to ignore controversial issues. End quote. If you focus on it intentionally, you can recognize it in a few minutes. However, if you are confused, it will be difficult for you to find it. As you will see in the next part, the relationship between these two processes determines how we behave. 2. The system is lazy. It can cause mistakes and influence intelligence. To see how both processes work, try to solve the famous stick and ball problem. A bat and a ball cost $1.10. A ball is $1 more expensive than a ball. So what is the price of the ball? The price that comes to mind is 10 cents. It is the result of an emotional and clear process, and it is working. Take a few seconds and try to solve this problem. You see your mistake. The correct answer is 5 cents. What happened now is that your subconscious system takes control and reacts by trusting your inner feelings. But it reacts very quickly. Usually, when an unclear situation arises, System 1 called System 2 to solve the problem, but System 1 was deceived in the problem of the bat and ball. It considers the problem to be very simple and mistakenly believes that it can be solved. The stick and ball problem reveals the nature of our lazy mental effort. When the brain is active, we usually use only the minimum amount of energy that is sufficient for that task. It is also known as the rule of minimum effort, because with System 2, more energy is spent on analyzing the answers. So when the mind feels that using System 1 is enough, it will not do that. Laziness is harmful. Because the practice of System 2 is an important part of human intelligence. Research shows that to do System 2, attention and self-critique are required, which makes us more intelligent. The stick and ball problem shows this because our brain could have used System 2 to check our answers twice and thus avoid common mistakes. If we are lazy to use System 2, then our brain will limit its intelligence. 3. Autopilot. Why don't we always consciously control our thoughts and actions? When you look at the word swandoscopy, what comes to your mind? Maybe nothing. But what happens if you first look at the word eat? Nay, when you look at the word swandoscopy again, you should be able to complete it in the form of soup. This process is also known as priming. When we come across such words, phenomena or incidents, that remind us of related words and phenomena, then we become greedy. If you look at the word shower, instead of the word eat, then you will see a picture of the word soap. This incident not only affects our way of thinking, but also affects the way we work. Just as your brain is affected by hearing some special words and phenomena, your body can also be affected. A major example of this incident can be found in a study in which the participants were attracted to words related to aging, such as Florida and Juria, whose reactions became lower than usual. Surprisingly, we are completely unaware of the fact that our thoughts and activities are affected by being left behind. Therefore, it is evident from the experience that, contrary to the general perception, we cannot always control our actions, decisions, and alternatives consciously. Instead, we are always subjected to some social and cultural circumstances. For example, the research done by Kathleen Voss proves that people live more personally than they think about money. For example, people who are addicted to money are less likely to look at pictures of money and work independently, and are less likely to connect with others, depend on them, or accept requests from them. One drawback of Vohen's research is that people can be more selfish by living in a society full of materialistic desires. Like other social factors, the thoughts and outcomes of an addicted person can affect his choices, decisions, and behaviors, and they are reflected in the culture and affect the social pattern in which we live. 4. A quick decision is taken by the mind so quickly, even when it does not have enough information to make a reasonable decision. Imagine that you meet a person named Ben in a party and find that he is very sociable. Then when someone asks you if you know a person who wants to donate, you think about Ben, although you only know how sociable he is. In other words, you like a part of Ben's personality, and that's why you think you like everything else about him. We often love or hate a person, even though we know very little about him. The mind's tendency to simplify things without enough information often leads to decision-making errors. This incident is called excessive emotional stability, which is also known as halo effect. A positive feeling about Ben's closeness causes you to put a burden on Ben, even when you do not understand what it is. But this is not the only way our mind adopts a shortcut while making a decision. People also have a tendency to agree with information that supports their beliefs and accepts whatever is suitable for them. We can see this incident when we ask, "Is James sociable?" Studies show that when such a question is faced without any other information, then it is easy to see James as a sociable person, because the mind agrees with the thought suggested in a natural way. Halo effects and positive feelings occur at the same time because our mind tries to make a decision as soon as possible. But this often leads to mistakes, because we do not always have enough data to make a correct decision. Our mind relies on wrong suggestions and makes things very simple to fill the gaps in the data, which we possibly end up with wrong conclusions. Like putting a weight, these cognitive events can occur completely unknowingly, and our choices can affect decisions and actions. 5. Mind uses a shortcut to make a decision so quickly we often find ourselves in situations where we have to make a decision immediately. To do this, our mind has developed small shortcuts to help us understand things around us immediately. These are called heuristics. For the most part, these processes are very useful, but the problem is that our mind often overuses them, Implementing these rules in inappropriate situations can lead to mistakes. To understand heuristics and the mistakes that occur after them in a better way, we can think of two types: implementing heuristics and availability of heuristics. Implementing heuristics and availability of heuristics. For example, let's say a woman is running for the election. How successful will she be in that office? How successful will she be in her career? We naturally change the question to which we should have given an answer, such as, does she look like a person who can be a good sheriff? This experiment means that instead of investigating the profile and policies of the expectant mother, we are just asking ourselves a very simple question. Is this woman in accordance with our mental image of the expectant mother? Is she a good sheriff or not? Unfortunately, if she does not fit in that mental image, then we will remove her, even though she has years of experience of fighting crime, which makes her a good expectant mother. After this comes the built-in heuristics, which happens when you feel that there is a high possibility of something happening because you hear about it more than once or find it easy to remember it. For example, there are more deaths in comparison to stroke accidents, but it was found in a study that 80% of respondents believed that more people die from stroke accidents. This is because we hear more about these deaths in the media and because they leave a deep impression. We remember deaths from a terrible accident more easily than strokes, and therefore we have a better chance of responding appropriately to these dangers. 6. Why do we find it difficult to understand numbers, and why do we make the right mistakes to avoid them? How can you predict whether this will happen or not? One effective way is to remember the Audiobook gate. It connects the Audiobook gate to the meter on which other meters depend. For example, imagine that a big taxi company has 20% yellow cars and 80% red cars. That is, for yellow taxis, the Audiobook gate is 20%, and for red cars, it is 80%. If you call a car and want to guess its color, remember the Audiobook meter, and you will make an expected, accurate prediction. Therefore, while predicting an incident, you should always keep the Audiobook gate in mind, but unfortunately this is not usually the case. In fact, it is very common to forget about the Audiobook gate. 7. We forget our base rate. One reason for this is that we focus on what we expect rather than what is most likely to happen. For example, imagine the above taxis. If you see 5 red cars passing by, you will feel that the next car will also be red. But no matter how many cars of any color pass by, the probability of the next car being red is still about 80%, and if we remember the base rate, then we will feel it. But instead, we often focus on what we expect to see, one yellow car, and therefore it is easy to make mistakes. 8. While dealing with data, we should ignore the general error base rate associated with human problems. We often forget that everything will come back to normal. This means that accepting that all situations have a middle ground and that the decline from the middle will come back to normal. For example, if a football striker who scores 5 goals every month scores 10 goals in September, then his coach will be happy. But if in the remaining days of the year he only scores 5 goals in a month, then the coach will criticize him for not being able to maintain his form. However, he is not worthy of criticism because he is only going back to normal. 7. We remember the evil of the past not by experience, but by seeing it later. Our brain does not record experiences in a straight line. We have 2 machines that record different situations. The first, experiential brain, which records how you are feeling in the present, asks, "How am I feeling right now?" The second is the flashback, which records the whole event. It asks, "How am I feeling normally?" The experiential brain, which is a more accurate description of what happened, because how we feel at that moment is the most accurate. But the flashback ontology is not as accurate because it records only some major memories after the event is over. There are 2 reasons for dominating the memory experience. The first reason is what is called a temporal delay, where we forget the whole sequence of an event and only remember a small part of it. This is due to the peak-exempt rule, where we often focus more on what happens at the end of an event. For the experiential brain, think of an experiment in which people's painful memories of colonoscopy were recorded. Before endoscopy, people were divided into two groups. One group had a very long colonoscopy, while the other group had a fast endoscopy, but in the end, the pain increased gradually. You may think that the most unfortunate patients had a colonoscopy for a long time because they had to endure the pain for a long time. At that time, they felt exactly the same. During endoscopy, when asked about the pain, the experiential brain will give the right answer, that the person who has to have a colonoscopy for a long time will feel worse. However, in the end, when the flashback itself prevailed, the people who had a colonoscopy with a more painful end, they felt the worst. This is a clear example of the effects of wrong memories and neglecting the rules of time and peaks and peaks. 8. Willpower. Willpower can negatively affect our thoughts and behavior by controlling the focus of the mind. Our brain uses different levels of energy. When there is no need to pay attention, and there is a little energy, we are in a state of cognitive ease. However, when there is a need to pay attention, the mind uses more energy and goes into cognitive stress. These changes in the energy levels of the brain have a negative effect on the way we work. When the mind is calm, the emotional system overpowers one mind and the cognitive and energy-conscious system becomes weak. This means that we will be more happy in taking creative decisions, but there is a higher chance of making mistakes. When our mind is tense, our awareness increases and the system takes two controls. System 2 re-examines our decisions in comparison to System 1, so even if we are less creative, we will make less mistakes. You can deliberately influence the amount of energy used by the mind, so that it can be chosen which system to master for each task. For example, if you want your message to be more inspiring, then try to go into a calm state of mind. One way to do this is to come into contact with the repeated information. If the information is given to us again and again, or it is easy to remember, it becomes more inspiring. This is because when we come into contact with the same message again and again, the mind has changed to react more positively. When we see something that we like, we reach a calm state of mind. On the other hand, a tense mind helps us to succeed in tasks related to numbers. We can reach this state when we get such information which is presented in a delusional way, for example, in a difficult font. Then, the mind will have to pay more attention to understand the problem and increase the level of energy, and therefore, the probability of us giving up will be less. 9. Take risks. How to take risks. How to present possibilities. It depends on how we take risks. The way we evaluate thoughts and face problems depends on how we present them. Just changing a little information or emphasizing a statement or question can make a dramatic change in our response. A good example of this, we can think of it as a risk assessment. You may think that once we determine the probability of a risk, everyone will look at it in the same way. However, this is not the case. Even with carefully calculated probabilities, the way we look at it by changing a number of words, it can change. For example, instead of calculating the probability of a rare event, the probability of a rare event will be more than the probability expressed in the context of the expression. An example, which is also known as Mr. Experiment Jones. I was advised by two groups of psychiatrists that it is safe to release Mr. Jones from the mental hospital at this time. One group was told that patients like Mr. Jones have a 10% chance of attacking others, and the other group was told that patients like Mr. Jones have a 10% chance of attacking others. As a result, the number of people who refused to release people was double in the Group 2 compared to the Group 1. Our attention is also distracted from the contextual information in a numerical way, which is known as every expectation. This happens when we ignore clear figures in favor of clear mental images, which can affect our decisions. For example, two unwritten sentences. This medicine will save children from disease from 1, but it has 0.1% permanent distortion and 1 out of 1,000,000 children who take this medicine will be permanently distorted. Although the meaning of both sentences is the same, but the latter sentence reflects the image of a distorted child, and its effect is more difficult to see. Why don't humans make decisions on the basis of logic, not robots? How do people choose? A group of influential economists have argued for a long time that people make decisions on the basis of logical logic. Their argument is that everyone chooses according to the principle of utility, and they emphasize that when people make decisions, they only look at the logical data and choose the option with the greatest utility. For example, the principle of utility will make an unwritten sentence that if you like kiwis, then you will choose the 10% chance of getting kiwis and the 10% chance of getting kiwis. It is obvious, isn't it? In this area, the most influential group of economists in Chicago is based in the School of Economics, and their most famous scholar is Milton Friedman. Using the principle of utility, the Chicago School believed that people in the market made superlogical decisions, which were later called econs by economist Richard Thaler and lawyer Cass Sunstein. With a businessman, everyone behaves exactly the same, values goods and services on the basis of their logical needs. In addition, financial people also value their wealth logically and are only interested in the profits they get from it. So imagine that two people, John and Jenny, have a total wealth of $5 million. According to the principle of utility, since they have the same amount, they will be equally happy. But if we make the matter a little more complicated, what will happen? Assume that the fortune of $5 million is the result of a day's gambling, and the beginning of both is different. John has only $1 million in the beginning, and he gets 5 times more in the end, whereas Jenny has $9 million, and she only has a loss of $5 million. Do you still think that John and Jenny are equally happy with $5 million? Obviously, we know things better than the principle of utility. As we will see in the next part, because people do not see utility as logically as the principle of utility claims, we can make strange and logical decisions. 11 false images make a complete picture to explain the world, but they often give birth to too much self-confidence and lies. To understand the situation, our mind uses cognitive reasoning. We create complete mental images to explain thoughts and ideas. For example, we have a lot of images about the weather in our mind. If we have a picture of the summer weather, then maybe we sweat a lot when we see a picture of a bright, hot sun. In addition to helping us understand things, we also rely on these images to make decisions. While making decisions, we take the context of these images and make assumptions and conclusions on their basis. For example, if we want to know what to wear in the summer, then we make our decisions based on the image of the summer in our mind. The problem is that we rely too much on these images. Even if the numerical and available data proves these mental images wrong, we will still consider them our guide. The weather scientist may feel that it will be cold today, but you are still in shorts and t-shirt, as your favorite picture of the summer tells you, so you can sit outside comfortably. We become too self-confident on false mental images, but there are ways to control this problem and make better predictions. One way to avoid mistakes is to use context-based predictions. Instead of taking decisions based on ordinary mental images, use historical data for more accurate predictions. For example, think about those times when you went out in the summer and it was cold. What did you wear then? In addition to this, you can make a long-term risk policy to make a plan for special measures. With the help of preparation and prevention, you can rely on evidence instead of mental images and make more accurate predictions. In the case of our weather, it means bringing a sweater to make sure. The main message, Thinking Fast and Slowly, shows us that our mind is made up of 2 processes. The system works in a normal way and very little effort is required for it. The system works more carefully and more concentration is required for it. Our thoughts and actions depend on which process is controlling the mind at that time.